Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we take a look at the 8th Legion Astartes, the Night Lords. Nowadays, the 8 mostly consists out of renegade warbands of sadistic pirates that sail the warp looking for plunder and prey to torture, humiliated by their Primarch's execution or disgusted at what the Imperium has become. All that remains for them now is to carve their horrific vengeance across the Imperial stars as they slowly die out. But it wasn't always meant to be this way, and in order to understand what happened, we have to go back in time, to before the Heresy, to their dark home, to Nostramo. Meet Nostramo, formerly known as the Dark Planet, currently known as Destroyed. Nostramo was a hellhole in every way imaginable. Circling a dying star, little light managed to reach the planet. Not that helped much, as the pollution-filled skies blocked out most of it. Nostramo was a planet covered in perpetual twilight, with the brightness of sky varying between dark and really fucking dark. Crime ran rampant, as there was simply no one to stop it. There were no laws except that might makes right, and thus the crime lords terrified everyone into submission. But don't hold any illusions, even their life was miserable. Unbeknownst to them, the interplanetary traders to whom they sold adamantium were ripping them off, only paying them a fraction of what it was worth in Imperial space, while of course asking ridiculous prices for their own wares. Sure, these crime lords could afford food and had a severely decreased chance of getting shanked, but luxury wasn't something anyone knew on Nostramo. There was only one upside to the planet, and that was a surprising lack of overpopulation. People were killing each other and themselves so frequently that the birth rate could hardly keep up. Indeed, this planet was so depressing that suicide was the leading cause of death, closely followed by murder. On one day, not particularly bleaker than any other, a meteorite crashed from the sky and quite impressively managed to smash a hole in the planet's adamantium crust. But this wasn't just an ordinary meteorite. This meteorite contained a boy named Konrad Curze. You have to understand that people are shaped by their upbringing, and Konrad Curze was no exception. But where the likes of Guilliman and Perturabo were raised by adoptive families, Konrad Curze was raised by the streets of Nostramo Quintus. He would grow up in a place where the only motivation people had to do something was fear. He would sleep listening to the screams of those being murdered or raped. And he would grow up without knowing any love or warmth, except maybe the heat coming off the bullets that regularly penetrated his skin. And from this childhood, the horrific ideology of the Night Lords was born. Konrad concluded that humans are horrible beasts, prone to doing stupid and horrible things. He believed that the only way to control this tendency is by fear. By punishing crimes in the most brutal way possible, people would be too afraid to commit them. In other words, all he had to do was to become a bigger monster than the monsters of the city, and the criminals would be scared into submission. So that's what he did. The Night Haunter, as the people of Nostramo called him, became a true weapon of terror. He stalked the streets every night hunting criminals. Their screams would fill the night sky, and every morning the people of Nostramo got a free ticket to Konrad's art show. Konrad didn't just torture his victims, he decorated the city with their flayed remains for all to see. Art critics might have considered his work a bit repetitive, but even if they did, they wouldn't have dared to voice such criticism. And well, it worked. Within 1 year, Konrad Curze had obtained control over the whole of Nostramo. Crime had become a thing of the past, and the planet's production rates tripled. He had even managed to reduce the suicide rates, albeit by horribly torturing anyone who even thought about killing themselves. And that's another thing you have to know about Konrad Curze. He has the power of foresight. He would often already see people commit crimes before they would commit them, which allowed him to punish people if they as much as considered committing a crime. The one problem with his ability at this point, however, was that his visions would always show him the worst possible way the future could pan out. Konrad didn't really know this, however, and believed his visions were the unchangeable truth. Needless to say, quite some more people were vibe-checked by the Night Haunter than was really necessary. Regardless, things were going relatively great on Nostramo. The increased production rates allowed the people some more luxury, and the gap between the rich and the poor rapidly closed as no one dared to have more money than their neighbor. After all, drawing much attention to yourself could earn you a visit from Murder Batman. It was a tyranny and everyone lived in fear. But they were also safe and generally speaking better off than before. Unfortunately, this didn't last long as the Emperor chose this moment to pay Konrad a visit, after which everything completely and utterly turned to shit. Already upon meeting the Emperor, Konrad's visions became considerably worse, especially as he met his brothers. He saw Rogol being dragged to his death and Lorgar screaming under a burning sky. He saw Fulgrim as a perverted entity, and upon seeing Ferrez, he saw his rotting, decapitated head in a Primarch's hand. Rather than sharing a moment of brotherhood with these newfound brothers, these visions plagued him greatly. But all that pales to what he saw next, because upon hearing the voice of the Emperor, he saw his own death. He felt himself choking on his own blood as he tried to stem the flow from his neck in vain. Then cold embraced him and there was nothing but pain. This vision would frequently return to haunt him during the following years. Regardless, the Emperor's touch temporarily banished his visions, and he was introduced into the Great Crusade, where he would be put in charge of the 8 Legion Astartes. Konrad reshaped the 8th into the Night Lords, and taught them the value of fear, which he had learned all too well in Nostramo. The Night Lords became notorious for being effective and brutal in equal measure. They became so feared that often they didn't even have to fight at all. Systems would return to compliance only upon hearing the Night Lords were assigned to them. To give you an idea of what those times were like, imagine that you were a planetary governor of a cool planet and one day you decide you don't feel like paying the imperial taxes. After all, who does that Emperor douchebag think that he is, spending your money on golden suits for his guard while your people starve and suffer? Regardless, within a couple of months, you learn that there's an imperial ship on their way to your planet. You think yourself smart and send your best warship to intercept it. Weeks later, the ship arrives back in orbit and you start organizing a planet-wide celebration. You were victorious. Surprisingly enough, there doesn't seem to be a lot of damage to the ship, but strangely enough, the Vox system seems to be down. Oh well, malfunctions happen all the time, maybe you should try turning it off and on again. The celebrations are in full swing, but you're still trying to contact the crew members of the ship. You become increasingly more worried and call your tech priest to bring some incense. Then all of a sudden, the ship descends into very low orbit and opens its cargo bay. Flayed corpses start raining down from the ship while the screams of the ship's crew are being broadcast all across the planet. You contact the ship and beg for mercy, but you'll only get a single reply. We have come for you. These stories about the Night Lords soon spread throughout the galaxy, and many enemies would rather surrender than fight against these monsters. These were the glory days for the Night Lords, but trouble was brewing both in Nostramo and in Konrad's mind. Since the meeting with the Emperor, Konrad's visions have been getting worse and worse. He foresees a Horus Heresy, and for once he tries to see whether he can change the future. Without delay, he hurries to his closest brother, Fulgrim, of the Emperor's children. This turned out to be a poor choice, as this gossiping asshole tells Rogal Dorn about what Konrad said. Now, Rogal Dorn is a lot of things, but compassionate is absolutely not one of them. Following his conversation with Fulgrim, Rogal paid Konrad a visit and tries to beat the absolute crap out of him for daring to voice such heretical thoughts. In other words, Rogal briefly explained why they are called the Imperial Fists. Konrad manages to fight off his angry brother and flees, but for Konrad this confirms it. He was right all along. The future can be changed, and no matter how horrific the visions are, they are correct. You gotta understand that from this moment on, Konrad not only knows that the entire Great Crusade will only result in disaster, he knows that all the brotherly bonds between his brothers and their sons are bound to be shattered. But most of all, he knows that his father will sentence him to death as a scapegoat for the Imperium's brutality. These mind-wrecking visions cause Konrad to fall even further into insanity, and he starts to lose control over his body at times. During these visions, which start to increase in length and frequency, he now starts to destroy and kill all around him, without being able to do anything about it. He even goes as far as to instruct his sons to lock him up if he falls into this state again. Initially, he experiences a great amount of disgust and grief at the monster he is slowly becoming. He starts to see visions of himself, laughing maniacally while butchering humans in horrifying fashion. But the Night Haunter starts to become more and more present in his psyche, and his bloodlust increases accordingly. Meanwhile, while Konrad is losing his mind and preoccupied with visions of the Horus Heresy, another heresy is taking place on Nostramo. Now that Konrad is no longer there to keep the peace, the crime lords have killed the planetary leaders and are starting to reform the planet back into what it used to be. But this is a much bigger problem than you might initially suspect, because this isn't just a planet, it is also the recruiting planet for the Night Lords. The planet was supposed to send ships with promising individuals to be ascended to new Astartes. But instead, the planet started to send all the unwanted lunatics. For them it seemed like a win-win scenario. You get rid of the unwanted madman and get to keep the strong and the sane to work for you. So while Konrad was losing his mind, his legion was rapidly being filled with sadists, psychopaths and cannibals. And by the time this was brought to Konrad's attention, it was already too late. His glorious legion was now filled with the monsters that he used to hunt, and the legion's ideal was already gone. These new Night Lords didn't use the brutality as a means to an end, it just turned them on. It gets really bad, by the way. We eventually reach a point where prized humans are given tokens of protection so they aren't accidentally killed by an excited Night Lord. Yup, hunting humans has become a hobby within the 8th Legion, similar to how the Iron Warriors play board games or how the White Scars keep horses. Now before we go to the next event, I'd like to give a shout out to the sheer stupidity of the people who thought it would be a good idea to organize a revolution on the home planet of the Night Lords. Of all the people that you could piss off in the entire galaxy, you chose the Legion known for its brutal lack of mercy, led by a dude called the Night Haunter. You somehow believed that you could just get away with ruining his Legion and that the marginally bigger profits would be worth it. Anyway, Konrad ordered his entire Legion to assemble in the orbit of Nostramo and then gives the order to destroy the planet. Yeah. Many Night Lords initially questioned that order, but once it turns out that those who voice their displeasure get their heads shot off without warning, the order is swiftly executed. The entire fleet of the Night Lords fired all their weaponry on Nostramo Quintus, on the crack that Konrad's birding pod left in the planet's crust, and Nostramo gets absolutely obliterated. At this point, Konrad more or less just gives up, as he doesn't know what to do anymore. Victory is impossible, disaster is inevitable, so you might as well just give in to your darkest urges and do whatever fucked up shit you feel like. To quote his own words, "I have seen darkness, witnessed it in my dreams. I am standing at the edge of a chasm. There is no escaping it. I know my fate. For it is the future, and nothing can prevent it from coming to pass. So I step off and welcome the dark." And the rest is history. Horus betrays the Emperor and the Night Lords give the Ravens a peace of mind during the Dropside Massacre. The Night Lords spend most of the Heresy trolling the Dark Angels via guerrilla tactics, while Konrad gets captured and kicked off into space by Sanguinius. The Siege of Terra turns out to be somewhat of a clusterfuck, and the 8th Legion pretty much falls apart afterwards. They only gather once more after Konrad Curze is rediscovered. Here, their Gene Father tells them that he is going to commit suicide by letting his father's assassin kill him and orders his sons to stand down. Furthermore, he tells them that he despises all of them, hates what they have become, and doesn't care in the slightest what happens to them after his death. This speech would later be nominated for the least motivational speech of the Horus Heresy. Then after the Imperial assassin gives Konrad a taste of his own medicine, the Legion turns into what they are today. Many set off to enact vengeance against the Imperium, some because of their father's death, others because they're sick of humanity's weakness and their hypocrisy. Some more ambitious warbands set off to achieve their own goals, while the most deluded set off to find new prey to hunt. Regardless, the 8th Legion is no more, and these ragtag warbands of pirates and madmen are all that remains. If you want to know more, I highly recommend checking out the Night Lords trilogy by ADB and the Primarch book by Guy Haley. I have covered both of those in videos, so if you'd like to know more, make sure to check them out. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please let me know in the comments and I'll consider doing one for another faction. But for now, that was all I got for you today.